In this lecture, we are going to load our styles in the editor. So far, we've been switching back and forth between the editor and front end. The purpose of the Gutenberg editor is to let clients visualize their theme during the design process. What is shown in the editor should be reflected on the front. In some cases, this may not always be possible. However, we should try to get as close as possible. In the previous lecture, we added classes for centering the blocks. At the moment, we're not able to see the effect of these classes until switching over to the front end. WordPress provides a solution for loading our theme's CSS files into the editor. We should implement this solution for the fastest possible editing experience. It's going to make the design process faster. Let's get started. In your text editor, open the functions.php file. The process for loading files in the Gutenberg editor is different from loading files on the front end. We need to use an entirely different set of functions and hooks. Under the Hooks section, we are going to add an action hook called After Setup Theme. The After Setup Theme hook is an event that runs after our theme has been loaded. It's one of the earliest hooks available. Loading styles in the editor must be performed in this hook. WordPress recommends this hook for setting up your theme. The name of your function is going to be called uSetupTheme. The next step is to define this function. Let's create a file inside the includes folder called setup.php. Inside this function, define the uSetupTheme function. Lastly, we need to include this file. Back in the functions file, call the include function with the getThemeFilePath function. The path to the file is includes/setup.php. We can start loading our files. Back in the setup file, we're going to run two functions. First, we need to call the addThemeSupport function. WordPress has various features we can leverage. One of these features is allowing themes to add styles to the Gutenberg editor. Before adding styles, we need to tell WordPress that we intend to do so. The addThemeSupport function allows us to enable this feature. This function has one argument, which is the feature we'd like to enable. The name of the feature is called Editor Styles. By enabling this feature, we can begin loading CSS files in the Gutenberg editor. Afterward, let's run a function called addEditorStyle. Unlike the front end, we do not need to register or queue files for the Gutenberg editor. The addEditorStyle function is a shortcut for loading CSS files into the editor. We can pass in a path to a single file. However, there's an alternative solution for calling this function. An array can be passed in to load multiple files. For our purposes, passing in an array is the best solution. We have three files that need to be loaded. They're the same files that were registered and enqueued in the enqueue.php file. Let's open this file. One by one, we are going to copy the paths from the WP register style function. They will be pasted into the array of the addEditorStyle function. The addEditorStyle function is smarter than the register and enqueue functions. It can handle absolute and local paths. If the path is a valid HTTP URL, the style will get loaded through the URL. Otherwise, the addEditorStyle function will assume the file can be found locally. It'll automatically generate a full path to our themes folder. Therefore, we can pass in a path relative to the theme folder. The getThemeFileURI function is not necessary. In total, there should be three files, one for the Google font, another for the icons, and lastly, the index.css file. We're ready to test our code. Save your changes. Afterward, refresh the page in the browser. The paragraph block should have moved slightly. It may not be easy to see because of the limited space. There's a better way to test the changes. click on the HTML block. On the toolbar, there's an option to preview the HTML in the editor. If we click on it, the preview should look similar to the header on the front end. There are some inconsistencies. However, that's not going to be a problem. The HTML block will be deleted after transforming the header into blocks. As long as you see something similar to what I have, you're good to go. Our styles have been successfully loaded. There's one more piece of information worth mentioning. It's not apparent, but WordPress will modify our CSS selectors. Behind the scenes, WordPress changes our selectors by adding the Editor Styles Wrapper selector. This is known as encapsulation. Blocks are not the only UI elements in the Gutenberg editor. There's the editor itself. This includes the sidebar, list view, and buttons at the top. By loading CSS, we can potentially break the Gutenberg editor. To avoid this issue, WordPress will modify your CSS code. In most cases, this shouldn't break your site. This process only applies to the Gutenberg editor. It does not affect the front end or final result. Here's an example of how encapsulation works. We have a class called Example. During the loading phase of the Gutenberg editor, the Editor Styles Wrapper classes is added. Therefore, the final selector becomes Editor Styles Wrapper Example. This feature is beneficial. It prevents us from accidentally breaking the Gutenberg editor with our styles. Some problems will arise from this feature. However, we'll tackle them in a future lecture. Let's get back into creating blocks.